What if the story of the Tower of Babel isn't about sin, but about freedom? What if what we were told was a divine punishment was actually the beginning of the greatest rebellion in human history? Have you been taught that this story is a lesson about human arrogance and God's judgment? The truth might be far deeper and far more subversive than you can imagine. Let's deconstruct this narrative. Let's see why the Tower of Babel isn't a tale of disobedience, but a celebration of diversity. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew. Part 1. The Silenced Context. The City of Uniformity. Let's start with a simple question. What were the builders of Babel doing? The traditional narrative says they were trying to reach heaven to defy God. But is that what the text actually says? Genesis 11 begins with a disturbing premise. The whole earth had one language and a few words. Imagine this. A world where everyone thinks alike, where all ideas are expressed in the same way. A world without debate, without differences, without innovation. This isn't paradise. It's a prison of thought. And then, these people decide to build a city and a tower. Why? The text says two things. To make a name for themselves and so they would not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. The common interpretation has us believe this was an act of pride. But what if we look at it from another perspective? Isn't the attempt to make a name a search for identity in a uniform world? In a world where everyone is the same, individual identity is erased, and not being scattered isn't just a whim. It's resistance to dispersion, to isolation, a struggle to build a community that sticks together. The story has led us to believe these motivations were bad. But what if this total uniformity, this control over thought and expression, was the real problem, and the tower was a response to that oppression? The text doesn't say God was angry because he was being defied. It says God saw that the humans had a power and a unity that, in a context of control, could be extremely dangerous. Part 2. Divine Punishment or Liberating Intervention. This is where the story gets really interesting. God comes down and says, now nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Think about that phrase. It's not a threat. It's a declaration of limitless power. And right after, God's solution is to confuse their languages. But is this a punishment? The traditional narrative tells us it is. That the confusion of languages was a punishment for their arrogance. But what if we see it as an act of grace? When God confuses the language, what happens? The city, which was a symbol of uniformity and control, cannot be completed. The people can no longer communicate with the oppressive ease of the past. They have to separate, they have to scatter. And with that scattering, something new is born. Diversity. Different cultures, different languages, different ways of thinking are born. What the conventional narrative calls chaos is actually the birth of plurality. It is difference that makes us unique. It is the conflict of ideas that leads us to evolve. Was the Tower of Babel truly a punishment, or an act of liberation? Imagine a world where all books are written the same way, where all songs sound alike. It's a boring, static world. The confusion of languages broke that mental monoculture. It gave birth to the thousands of cultures, traditions, and languages we have today. Part 3. The contradictions in the text and the God of diversity. But is there anything in the Bible that supports this view? Absolutely. If we look at the same book of Genesis, we see that just before the Babel story, God's official command to humanity was to be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. God's original command was not for humanity to stay in one place and build a single monolithic city. It was to scatter and fill the earth. The Tower of Babel, with its purpose not to be scattered, was actually a direct disobedience to God's original command. So, what did God do? He didn't punish them for arrogance. He intervened to restore his original plan. He confused the languages to force people to do what they were told to do from the beginning, to scatter. It was not an act of revenge, it was an act of redirection, a push toward freedom and diversity. The story of the Tower of Babel is not a tale of God's wrath. It's a tale about a God who values diversity above uniformity, freedom above control. It's a reminder that sometimes what seems like punishment from God is actually an intervention to break our cages and give us the opportunity to be truly free. What if the Babel story was a critique of institutions and empires that seek to make people uniform and controlled thought? Think about the religious institutions that have tried to impose a single way of thinking, a single doctrine, a single language. Isn't the Babel story a warning against this kind of oppression? The chaos of Babel isn't a curse, it's a gift. It's the gift of difference, the gift of diversity. It's the foundation upon which the richness of the human experience is built. It's the story of how humanity, despite its attempts to control itself, was liberated by a God who values plurality over uniformity. So, the next time someone tells you the Tower of Babel is a tale of divine punishment for human arrogance, consider the possibility that it's the exact opposite. Consider that it's a myth that teaches us that the chaos of language, the diversity of ideas, and the difference of cultures is not a mistake, but a cry for freedom. How does this perspective change the way you see the world? Do you still think uniformity is God's goal, or do you now see the beauty in multiplicity? The challenge for you, for me, for all of us, is to learn to read these stories with fresh eyes, not as dogmas, but as provocations, not as answers, but as questions. Because the truth often isn't in what you were told, but in what you dare to ask. If this video has made you question your own faith, I invite you to join this community of free thinkers. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear a different perspective, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is Babel a myth of chaos or a cry for freedom? The debate has just begun.